There are global myths of success whispering in my ear, telling me that real life begins only when I hit some distant standard. I noticed how comparison turned my days into projections. Numbers, titles, a language of shiny abstractions, while the local, the reachable, sat quietly right in front of me. My attention drifted from what is here to what might be there, and it struck me. I wasn't living. I was narrating an ideal. That's when Odysseus appeared in my mind, not as a historical hero, but as a mirror. His voyage felt like the map of how I got lost in ideals and how I could return to the present. I realized the world sells us siren songs, polished success stories that make our local life seem unworthy. My calendar filled with plans to impress an invisible crowd, and I mistook the language of aspiration for life itself. Have you ever measured a day not by what you touched, loved, or built, but by how it might look to others? The more I chased the global myth, the more I drifted from the ground under my feet. Odysseus's dilemma wasn't just monsters. It was the pull of what gleams. My dilemma wasn't laziness, it was being hypnotized by what never arrives, because it only exists as an idea. At first I refused the call to come back to the local. It felt too small, too ordinary. My mind said, stay with the projections, there's grandeur there. I kept editing myself into a future highlight reel. The present moment was unmarketable. Eckhart Tolle says the now is where life actually is, yet I treated the now like a waiting room. My ego loved the comparison game because it kept me fantasizing and protected me from the tender risk of being fully here. Have you ever postponed your aliveness until the conditions look impressive enough? That was me, bargaining away breath by breath. The more I postponed, the more the ideals tightened their net. They promised certainty, but delivered distance. Jung observed that what we resist in ourselves takes on a mythic power. My refusal to inhabit the ordinary inflated the extraordinary into a tyrant. I rationalized, when I become the story, then I'll be present. But presence cannot be retrofitted later. The sea doesn't wait for the perfect sailor. I felt it in my body, tension in the jaw, a tempo of breath that was never quite here. I knew I had to risk looking unremarkable in order to become real again. So I made a pact with myself like Odysseus lashing to the mast. If the sirens of global validation sing, I will not steer toward them. My mast was a set of small practices. Feel my feet before I open the phone, name 3 textures I can touch, complete 1 reachable act in my local world before noon. Tolle points to the power that arises when attention settles in what is. I chose to stay with the raw data of the moment. Breath, light wood grain, an email I can answer with kindness. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a crossing. I felt the keel bite real water again. Crossing the threshold meant reorienting value. Instead of asking, how will this read to the myth of success? I asked, how does this feel in my hands? Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to return to what is up to him. I borrowed that stoic clarity. I brought my attention home, the coffee's warmth, the weight of my pen, the neighbor's hello. Jung would say I was withdrawing projections, reclaiming life from the fantasy realm. It was humbling. The local tasks were simple, but they were mine. Each finished dish, each sincere message, each honest breath felt like tying another knot on that mast. Then came trials. The lotus eaters appeared as endless feeds and vapid metrics, sweet forgetfulness tempting me to nap inside someone else's dream. I nearly surrendered to their petals of novelty. But I remembered, the more I consume illusions, the less I taste the present. So I set limits like moorings in the surf, timers, boundaries, gentle exits. Odysseus dragged his drowsy crew back to the boat. I dragged my attention back to my breath, not to punish desire, but to wake it up for real nourishment. Have you ever noticed how quickly the promise of ease becomes a fog? Another trial. Polyphemus, the one-eyed cyclops who sees only one way, like the tyrant of language that collapses life into a single label, worthy, unworthy, winner, loser. Odysseus survives by calling himself nobody, slipping past the monster of fixed identity. I practiced that humility. When the inner critic snarled, I answered, I don't need a title to be here. Jung might say, the ego softens, and the self can breathe. With less obsession over names, I could taste my tea, write a paragraph, show up for a friend. The world regained dimension when I stopped looking through that single judging eye. The deeper waters rose. Between Scylla and Charybdis I faced two terrors, the fear of seeming small and the whirlpool of endless proving. Choose visibility and risk being average, choose proving and be swallowed by striving. There's no clean route, only a courageous steering. Odysseus loses men. I lost illusions. I grieved the fantasy of a life that would finally make me invulnerable. Tolle's reminder helped. Presence isn't perfection. It's union with what is. I let the boat rattle. In accepting some loss, I passed the strait. Not unscarred, but more honest, and oddly lighter. Then came the underworld. The Nekia, the descent Jung saw as meeting the shadow. In that dark, I met my ghosts. The child who wanted applause to feel safe. The adult who hid behind language instead of love. I listened as Tiresias within me said, "Your Ithaca isn't a headline. It's the ordinary fully inhabited." I cried. For the years I outsourced aliveness to an audience that never arrives. But in that grief was a door. The dead released me to the living moment. When I rose, even the creak of a chair felt like a bell. This was the power of now earned. I returned to my shore, which turned out not to be distant Ithaca, but this very day. The myths of global success still sing, but like Odysseus, I've learned not to hand them the wheel. I measure by what I can touch and tend. When I wash a cup, it gleams like treasure. When I write a page, it anchors a small corner of the world. Jung would say I'm integrating, no longer split between the image of life and life. Tolle would nod. The present is enough, because it's real. Quietly, the ordinary has become luminous, and that is victory enough. So here is my invitation. Live locally inside your own breath. The global myths have their place as stories, not as masters. Ask, what can I love? Build and notice within arm's reach today. Because life is not a projection, it is a presence. Tell me in the comments, where do the sirens sing loudest for you? And what is your mast? What small, reachable act will you honor before noon tomorrow? This reflection comes from Felipe Brando, who learned that success is not out there in perfect language, but here in the honest weight of what your hands can hold now.